Hello, everyone. My name is Antoni Piza. I am the director of the Foundation for Iberian Music at the City University of New York. I'm a musicologist and a writer. And my guest today, I have the great honor to have here Angel Gil-Ordonez. He is a musician and he is the musical director of Postclassical Ensemble. He is also a professor at Georgetown University in Washington, and he is also taught at Wesleyan University. Angel has developed a very long career conducting and also teaching, mostly here in the United States. And so it's a great, great, great honor to have this conversation. Full disclosure, Angel and I have been friends for many years, and we have been involved in common endeavors, putting together programs, and of all of these, of his careers and some of our programs, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Hi, Angel. How are you?
Antoni, such a great pleasure having this conversation with you. This is going to be terrific. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, as I was saying, you and I met many years ago, but when I understand that you came to the United States in 1994, I believe, correct? Yeah.
Well, we arrived actually, and my wife and I, Adriana, arrived. I remember perfectly because it's right now, a few weeks ago, was 30 years of our arrival to the United States, December 6, 1993.
Yeah.
And, it's a very American story. I can say I came to the United States because of love. I was finishing my contract as the associate conductor of the National Symphony. I met Adriana in Madrid in a beautiful, emblematic place in the Residencia de Estudiantes, where I was a fellow. I was living there for 3 years. And she said, I have to go to New York, as she was the press attaché in Madrid. And then she said, I have to be in New York as the press attaché. I said, let's go to New York. And I was preparing my performances in Europe for 1 year. So I was kind of back and forth. And then at some point I realized, actually, it was El Amor Brujo by Manuel de Falla, which made me realize an engagement for the Joyce Theater, a recording I had to do with that was in 94, with the New Mexico Symphony for a ballet presentation. And I realized this is the place I have to stay to develop my career. So this is how I arrived to the United States, to New York first, and then we moved to Washington in 1996.
Okay, yeah. So 30 years ago, so you arrived in the United States more or less 30 years ago. But before that, you had a career in Europe, first as a student and then as a professional. Tell us a little bit about your education as a conductor. You studied in Madrid, I assume. You're originally from Madrid, let's say that. Yes. And you studied in Madrid, and then?
And then, exactly. So I studied in Madrid. My instrument was the violin. I had a wonderful teacher, who was the principal viola of the National Symphony, Don Antonio Arias, who was a student of Mathieu Crickboom. Mine is the Belgian School of Violin, and he was an extraordinary teacher. He didn't teach at the conservatory, so I had private studies with him, and I would make my examinations at the conservatory. That was something that actually in Spain was very interesting, that the conservatory allowed you to have private lessons outside, and then you would take exams. So I studied harmony, composition, etc., all with the violin. And then in the spring, I wouldn't forget that date, April 1978, arrives to Madrid a conductor that everybody said he's a very weird, strange, he has a terrible temper, but he's a genius. And his name was Sergio Celibidache. So he came with the London Symphony to the at the time, the Teatro Real Auditorium, not Opera House, with the London Symphony. And there was an epiphany. I said, how is it possible that an orchestra can sound like this? I couldn't believe it. But the even more revelation is that the next year, in 1979, we had the privilege in Madrid to have an extraordinary conductor as the principal director conductor of the National Symphony, Antoni Marvà, and Marvà invited Celibidache to the National Symphony. So imagine an orchestra that at the time, now is a completely different orchestra. At the time, the National Symphony in Madrid was not a top orchestra. And then suddenly I went to the rehearsals. He transformed the orchestra. It was an incredible experience, So I said, okay, this is it. I have to study with this guy. So what happened is that, I prepared myself, I studied, finished the harmony and stuff, and I went to Munich. And this was actually my education with him. I worked with him for 6 years, even at his assistant several times. And I studied composition too with a great composer, the Günther Pialas and Paul Daniel. So that's my education comes from there. So there is of course, an initial education in Spain, and then everything I know about conducting, I know it thanks to Sergio Celibidache, who became my mentor and teacher.
Yeah, well, I guess that is one of the best mentors that you could ever have. One of the greatest conductors, Sergio Celibidache. Yeah, and then you came to the United States, as we were saying earlier, in 1993, 1994. You conducted Love the Magician by Manuel de Falla with the Joyce Theater for a ballet here in New York, and you decided that you had fallen in love with your wife, Adriana, whom I know her very well too. And you were about to start a family, I guess. And then you decided to stay here. And what happened next? You stayed in New York a year or two, and then you moved to Washington. And in Washington, you started a new organization, right? An ensemble. Tell us about that.
Exactly. So during my stay in New York, we lived there in New York for 3 years almost, 93, 96. During my stay, I had the privilege of meeting an extraordinary thinker and a writer, Joseph Horowitz,
yes,
who at the time was the artistic director of the Brooklyn Philharmonic at the emblematic place at the time, the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Bam.
So I attended some of the performances, and I was completely fascinated by the way Joe Horowitz thought about the concept of a concert. To me, that was an image that it was very impactful to me. So years later, we moved to Washington, actually, because at that time, 96, I was, doing work between Europe, etc. But at that time, I was completely convinced that I had to really create something, a project here in the United States. And we moved to Washington. It was a little relatively, by chance we moved here. I met musicians in Washington, and I created an orchestra. And the first orchestra that I created in Washington was Música Aperta, that was the name, and it was focused on Spanish and Latin American music. So I felt a little constrained by just playing that repertoire. And at some point that was actually in 98, as a parenthesis, I became the director of orchestral studies at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. So I was commuting from Connecticut to Washington with Música Aperta. But I thought, we need to do something more relevant. We need something to do a little more avant-garde. And I told Joe Horowitz, Joe, do you want, I would love to count on your help to create a new orchestra in Washington that would somehow encompass your philosophy of programming. And we call that orchestra post-classical ensemble. That was, we started thinking about in 2000. We had a first performance 2002, and then the first season was 2003, 2004. And we have been, so we are celebrating this season 20 years. Joe left the organization almost 2 years ago, and now I'm in charge of all the artistic direction, learning from that experience of the years, but also bringing post-classical ensemble to a different dimension, because Washington is not New York. And, it's a different mentality, it's a different way of understanding music. And I'm very happy to say that everything is going very, very well.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy and Joe Horowitz's philosophy and the philosophy of post-classical ensemble? In some place, I read a fantastic sentence which you describe it as a laboratory for musical thought experiments, something like that. So tell us a little bit about the philosophy of post-classical ensemble, which you and Joe Horowitz created.
So I have always been obsessed by the idea of why people that love film, art films, just go to see contemporary art, visual art, go to theater and listen to 3-4 hours of Shakespeare, don't go to concerts. So, I mean, everybody talks about we need to bring younger people to the concert hall. I have to confess, I mean, I'm very happy we do that work. But to me, what's more important is how is these people that are doing such an incredible intellectual effort cannot appreciate a symphony by Gustav Mahler or by. And I realized that attending Joe's programs at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, the problem was not the classical music, was the format of the concert. So the problem of attending for this audience is that they wouldn't relate to something that was, I'm not criticizing it, I'm saying that there is an audience for that, and many orchestras are doing it, it's wonderful. But for these people, these marginal people, the idea of starting a concert without anything, a Mozart overture, a piano concerto with soloists, an intermission, and then a large symphony, which is the format that has been existing for 150 years or more, doesn't work. So what is missing there? What is missing there is what these people can relate to, which is film missing, is theater missing, is visual arts missing. And in the end is this idea, this multidisciplinary approach to what a concert is, which in the end should be, we are always with post-classical ensemble telling a story. I think that's the secret to attract a different audience. And we tell different stories. One of the most beautiful stories we told when we were in residence at the Washington National Cathedral is a marvelous story, which is in 1889, Claude Debussy attends to the Universal Exhibit in Paris. And for this first time, listens to a gamelan, which is the traditional Indonesian orchestra. There are gamelans, there is a tradition of gamelan in Bali, there is a tradition of gamelan in Java. So there is the Javanese and the Balinese. That changed completely the Debussy's approach to composition. Because for the first time, he listened to at different scales, but probably more importantly, to resonances. So how do you we told that story? So we were, imagine the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. I put the orchestra in the middle, and we had a Balinese gamelan on one side of the nave, a Javanese gamelan on the other side of the nave. And we created a dialogue trying to imitate that experience that Debussy had. So, and we played composers that were influenced by that. So we played music by Debussy, by Ravel, by, of course, Lou Harrison, the piano concerto, which is one of the most extraordinary piano concertos ever written in the American repertoire. We played music by Colin McPhee, by Olivier Messiaen. So this is the way that post-classical ensemble presents the music. So in the end is bringing elements that are totally connected to the music, but if you don't put them there, the audience cannot relate.
Very interesting, obviously. And you've done quite a few of these programs. One, as you just said, at the Cathedral, National Cathedral in Washington, was what was the title? Gamelan and Western music, or
yes, the title. Let me see.
Well, I would encourage anyone who is curious to go to your webpage, Post Classical.
Yes, of course.
And
it's there.
Most of these things, I know for a fact that they are there. What other programs have you done, in this kind of thematic programming?
Well, thinking of the idea of film, film has been very important to us. We have presented many times music accompanying a silent film or a film that had some kind of dialogue. In that sense, we restored the music of two extraordinary documentaries of the New Deal, The Plow That Broke the Plains, The River, both with music by Billy Thompson, an extraordinary documentary, The City, with music by Aaron Copland, and probably even more importantly, an extraordinary Mexican film with cinematography by Paul Strand called Red Fisherman's Nets, by a composer that is, in my opinion, probably the most extraordinary Latin American composer of the 20th century, Silvestre Revueltas. And we have presented those films with the music live. So that's an important component that we work on. We have been always very interested in how the popular influences, so the vernacular influences composers. In that sense, we have worked on flamenco, of course, and the influence in Spanish music. We had a beautiful program called Shardas, in which we brought a traditional band of Budapest playing the original melodies, in which Bartók was inspired by for instance, the Romanian dances. So that kind of influences we like to explore. More recently, we had a beautiful program called Paris at Midnight, in which this is another way of programming that we like to do. For instance, a masterpiece, as you know, is the Ravel Piano Concerto in G major. How do you explain that concerto? So how do you contextualize that concerto? So we try to figure out what was in Ravel's mind at the time. And what was in Ravel's mind at the time was what was going on in Paris at the time, which was incredible. On the one hand, you had those surrealists, the Dadaists doing the craziest things you can imagine. On the other hand, the American jazz was taking Paris by storm, Josephine Baker, Cindy Bechet. And all that is reflected in that piano concerto. So the story we told there, we started the performance with an accordionist playing traditional Paris music. Then we showed a crazy film by René Clair called Entr'acte, with music by Eric Satie. From there, we showed a beautiful clip of Josephine Baker beautifully singing and dancing. Then we created a jazz set with music de Sidney Bechet, and then we ended the performance with Ravel Piano Concerto. So that's a way also to focus on a specific piece and contextualize that.
Well, I think that the genius, if you want, of a post-classical ensemble and the work you've done with these musicians and curators and filmmakers, actors, because that's one of the things that when you present these programs is not only a concert, as you said, you have a film, you have a concert, you relate all that to maybe an exhibition or some art pieces in the Washington area. So it's a whole artistic experience, and so it's a very innovative way of programming music and very different from the standard format of the Boston Symphony Orchestra or the New York Philharmonic or the National Orchestra of Spain, which, of course, there will always be an audience, and there should be an audience for that kind of programming. But interestingly, I'm just repeating what you said, but I think it's very important to highlight those aspects. There is a section of the audience which is educated people, artistically curious people, and actually they're artistically curious for an exhibition and for a jazz concert or for an avant-garde film, but they are not curious for so-called classical music. How do you bring them in? And your programs, if I'm allowed to say that, your programs kind of bring this audience to the standard classical repertoire. But you've done a lot of things. You have also conducted here in New York Perspectives Ensemble. Perspectives Ensemble, you'll tell us in a minute, it has been with you here in residence at the Foundation for Iberian Music, and we have presented many interesting programs. And to follow a little bit with the mission of the Foundation for Iberian Music, we have programmed with Perspective, you conducting, we have programmed a lot of Spanish music and including contemporary music, modern music. We commissioned a couple of several composers. We commissioned works from them. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then we also did more standard Spanish repertoire, including Granados, Albéniz, Manuel de Falla, these kind of things. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Perspectives Ensemble, and specifically, and also one part of your work, which is the Spanish repertoire, which in the United States, of course, is not very well known, right?
Absolutely. Well, the other important personality of which I'm very happy to have met here in the United States was the artistic director of Perspectives Ensemble, Sato Mougalian, an extraordinary flutist and thinker too, who created this incredible group of the best musicians in New York, really individuals with splendid careers playing in the major orchestras too. And Sato was very interested in Spanish music, very interested. That was the connection. And this is how we started creating this synergy with Perspectives. The first performance was in 1999, I remember perfectly, in the beautiful Weil Hall in Carnegie Hall, a program on Joaquin Turina. And this is when we started collaborating, Antoni, when you started with the Foundation for Iberian Music. And then another very important, crucial person in this quest was the extraordinary pianist, Pedro Carbonet, whom we lost a few months ago, who has been our colleague and friend for many years. The three of us, Antoni, I'm very, it sounds very arrogant, but I don't think never in the history of the United States, Spanish music has been presented with such consistency, with such quality, the way we have been able to do since 1999. It sounds terribly arrogant, but I think that's the reality. We have had extraordinary Spanish musicians in the United States, Alicia de la Rocha, Caballé, but the consistency in telling the story and explaining Spanish music to the American audiences, it has been a really an incredible journey. And I'm very privileged of having encountered with you, with Antoni, with Pedro, and with Sato. And yes, that's so we have premiere music by contemporary composers like Benet Casablancas, Gabriel Ercoreca, Mauricio Sotelo, in many different venues. As Antoni mentioned here in CUNY, in your home. We perform at the Kennedy Center, at Carnegie Hall. And then also the Pierre Paul Morgan Library became a home of perspectives for many, many projects. Antoni is an expert in Roberto Gerard. We perform music by Roberto Gerard too. Bringing the Spanish, explaining a little bit what is behind also that repertoire in the many different tendencies. Because Spanish music there are many composers that have been influenced by popular music, but there are also composers that have really taken their influences from Europe, from the center of Europe. The case of Gerard is very clear. There was the only actually a student of Arnold Schoenberg. So it has been a wonderful journey working on that.
Another composer I remember collaborating with you guys that we presented was Xavier Monsalvatge.
Absolutely.
Mm. His music has been performed in the United States, but it's a fantastic composer. So many great composers that are known, because we were not going to say that they are not known, but they could be known much better. Xavier Monsalvatge, Benet Casablanca, as you said, and also the typical Falla, of course, and Albéniz and Granados. We did a program,
absolutely
a full program for Enrique Granados, correct? Yeah.
And actually, we did in that program. We premiered a piece that another musicologist, Douglas Riva, discovered. It was the danza gitana, the gypsy dance.
Danza gitana.
Yeah. We did the premiere in the United States, and I think it was actually a world premiere. That was the first time that the piece was.
I think so too. Performed. Yes, Douglas Riva, great pianist. He's recorded most of the, if not all, most of the piano music of Granados, and he's also edited with Alicia La Rocha. They published a critical edition of the piano works. So you and I have had the great honor to collaborate with great people like Douglas Riva, and Benet Casablancas is another one, of course. Pedro Carbonet, whom we just remembered, and as you just said, we lost him this summer, unfortunately, prematurely. At the age of 63, I believe, great pianist, and many other people. So just to finish, what are you programming with, I guess, post-classical ensemble in the next season, in the next few months? Any exciting plans? I'm sure you do.
We're very excited, actually. So we are in February. We are going to present a program that relates to a beautiful exhibit at the National Gallery of Art on German Expressionism, which has a phenomenal title, The Anxious Eye. And we have, they have created a series of concerts in which we are going to be part of, that is called The Anxious Ear, which I love. I think it's a phenomenal way of relating the two components, the musical and the visual. So our program is going to include. So the exhibit is actually not only the German Expressionists, the Weimar Republic, to say, also the consequences of that. So we are including, the central piece is Kurt Weill's Seven Deadly Sins, which is writes on, you know, the full decadence of the Weimar Republic and etc. And we are including a piece that I really love and is not that better known, which is Arnold Schoenberg's Ode to Napoleon, which is an extraordinary piece that Schoenberg wrote as a response to Pearl Harbor. And unfortunately, it's very timely because it's an ode of disappointment that Lord Byron wrote on Napoleon, the disappointment of Napoleon becoming, you know, all the hopes were there, and then suddenly he's one more dictator in the history. So it's an extraordinary piece that actually is written by Schoenberg. It's a beautifully orchestrated with a very small group. It's a string quartet piano, but the important part is that it's done by a reciter, which the Germans call the Sprechstimme, which is talked rhythmically, you know, the same way that Pierrot Lunaire and other pieces by Schoenberg. So that will be, and actually in 2024, we are celebrating 150 years of Schoenberg. So it's another way to commemorate him. So that will be a beautiful program. And then in April, we are presenting a program on the music that nobody knows by Duke Ellington, of whom we are celebrating 125 years. So what people don't know is that Ellington wrote for symphony orchestra, wrote for ballet, and wrote for film. So this is, as post-classical ensemble do, we don't do what the usual things. So we are presenting a program on a symphonic music by Duke Ellington. And then, yeah.
No, you're totally right. That's post-classical ensemble does not do what normal ensembles do. I just wanted to highlight one of the programs that you did, which was, I wasn't there, so I never heard the concert, but I know that you've had this program, which is, it's a program dedicated to African-American women composers.
Yes.
And you paired the composers Florence Price and
Margaret Bonds, absolutely.
Margaret Bonds, and then you pair those two relatively unknown composers, African-American and female, as we were saying, and you pair that with the great thinkers of the African-American tradition, you know, Du Bois, the sociologist and professor and writer, and Du Bois, I think we should pronounce Du Bois.
Yes.
And also Langston Hughes, great poet and writer. So you paired those African-American women with those African-American thinkers, and that was one of your programs. So basically what I'm just saying, I guess, is that, as the poet said, you always take the road less traveled, and that deserves a lot of credit, in my view. So
but you said something. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Antoni. No, but you said something very important, which is crucial here. We are not dismissing or discarding what other orchestras are doing, which is essential. I mean, I'm not criticizing the Boston Symphony or the New York Philharmonic for offering this kind of. I mean, I have nothing against the traditional format, because in the end, what counts is the music. So this is the important thing. But what we want is to be a platform for those, as you said beautifully, that have a little more curiosity, that want to go beyond the mere act of listening to music, which is in the end is the most important part. And of course, I'm very privileged to count both in post-classical ensemble with the best musicians in the area. Our musicians are the principals of the National Symphony, the Baltimore Symphony, the Opera House. So also musicians that are curious, which is a very important thing. It has taken me 20 years to get the right musicians that are not only extraordinary, skilled players, but also that are curious and that really want to be involved with something that is different. And this is my privilege and my honor to count on people like that.
Yeah. Well, Post-Classical Ensemble normally performs at the Kennedy Center in Washington. And you have proven your point because everything I hear and I've read reviews and everything, your programs are always sold out. So this thematic programming is working. It's not a substitution for the regular format, but is there obviously there was a need for this thematic programming or this laboratory for thought experiments in music, as sometimes is being said, and your programs are sold out, which means that there is an audience that wants to hear this music and see and hear the music in the right context, the artistic milieu.
I'm very happy that this is actually happening, so that my feeling that there was an audience eager to different things is there. I mean, of course, we both, Antoni, you and I live in cities of highly educated people. I mean, Washington and New York, but not only that, people that are really sensitive and sensible. And what makes me very happy is that, for instance, in the gamelan concert, that suddenly somebody that goes to listen to the gamelan, which is their main interest, suddenly discover the music by Lou Harrison or Olivier Messiaen. So in the end, we are kind of giving debate of different things to people that don't know yet that they love Mahler, or that they love Debussy, or that they love Bernard Herrmann, for instance, who knew that Bernard Herrmann had an extraordinary music outside a quintet, for instance,
somebody that film music.
Exactly, outside film music. So this is also the idea, is to bring elements that people that are not familiar with come to, and then suddenly they realize, oh my God, how is it possible that I don't know about this? Mm-hmm. So it's taking risks is taking it's actually is being worth it.
It's rewarding taking risks. I think in the end for you it has been rewarding. But anyway, so I want to thank you very much for this minutes that we've spent talking, and I really wish you the best with Post-Classical Ensemble and Perspectives Ensemble, maybe, and who knows, the things that lay ahead of you and I maybe in the future. So it's going to be a great honor if we do something together sometime soon. But so thank you so much for spending this time with me and for answering all these questions and explaining to us the wonderful things that you've been doing all these years. So thank you, Angel.
Thank you so much, Antoni. Thank you so much, Antoni. It will happen that we will keep collaborating, that's for sure.
Yes, I'm sure. Thank you.